Like, if your middle schooler asks, what are they having at that table over there? You're not just gonna tell them they're having the ketamine.
It's not called the ketamine on the menu. Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanty Show's Righteous Kicks, the podcast where two science fiction writers geek out about men in spandex bodysuits who kick evildoers to death in abandoned quarries until they explode.
Well, sometimes they fight in the court of public opinion instead.
I'm Iori.
And I'm Brandon.
And today we have a lot of feelings about Kamen Rider Black Sun. And this time we're joined by special guest Sarah Hightower, a professional understander of terrorism and shitposter.
The shitpost from the sky is a rider kick.
I love it. One of us. I am so excited to have you on the show.
Nobody should be.
So we are here because we have all watched the 10 episodes of Kamen Rider Black Sun, available on Amazon Prime. Available with English subtitles, officially, so really no one has any excuse not to be watching it.
It's actually a lot of fun.
It's got that sweet, sweet Amazon budget, so the effects are chef's kiss.
It is very intense. It is their attempt to take risks after their last Amazon Prime collaboration, Kamen Rider Amazons, because, of course, that's the one that they did. And also one of the 50th anniversary series that they have finally launched. And it's very complicated, and we're going to have a lot of feelings.
So this is a full reboot of the Showa era Kamen Rider Black. They have handled this in such a way that I don't know how or if they intend to take a second run at Black RX as well.
Probably not. I mean, they could still, but I highly doubt it.
Maybe Aoi becomes Black RX?
A part of me is for it.
I would watch the Black RX reboot that is starring Aoi.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, we should probably briefly describe Kamen Rider Black Sun as best we can.
A grizzled old man with a slight ketamine dependency goes out to murder a child and then sympathizes with the child. And then it becomes Leon the Professional, except people can turn into insects.
That's actually a very good description, yeah.
Also, we're constantly flashbacking to the 1970s, and the fashion is exactly what you would expect.
I have feelings about the fashion, but I wasn't born when this happened, so I can't have those feelings.
I honestly love a lot of the visual effects applied to the flashbacks. They don't go full sepia, but there is something happening with the video quality to make it look essentially like an old at-home movie.
The fashion is on point.
I actually enjoyed a lot of the filmic storytelling that they used throughout the series in general, especially, as you mentioned, the flashback stuff, especially when it goes even further, and later at episode 10, a thing happens, but we won't get there immediately. But that's because people actually make meaningful, radical decisions in the past. That's why.
Yeah, these flashbacks feel a lot more like they are providing context than Kiva did.
But of course, that context is perhaps the thing that we're going to be talking about the most this evening. Some of those context beats go quite a bit over my head. I'm kind of curious to learn more about them. Of course, some of them are quite intense, so please refer to your own judgment when we mention some of these things. The world of Kamen Rider Black Sun is politically hostile, in particular to its marginalized kaijin community, in a way that is a very strong metaphor for the thing that you think that it is a metaphor of.
What's the meme? I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
But in particular, how certain marginalizations exist in Japanese society, which is a historical context I am loath to assume knowledge of. So I'm eager to learn more to fill the gaps in the things that I have learned, because it is a very strongly worded show, if that makes sense. It doesn't pull any punches about, like, direct references to Japanese history to the point where several villains are XPs of real politicians, which is very brave of Kamen Rider.
I was honestly delighted by this. That in 2022, only a few months after he got publicly iced, Kamen Rider would just come for Abe that way. Just point its finger and scream, "Fascist who continues to profit off war crimes." I loved that. I honestly think they could have done more of it and I would have been happy.
I mean, you're not wrong. Also, I just want to point out, as far as I am aware, at least, if the math that I'm doing in my head is correct, that scene had to be scripted, if not shot and edited, months before Abe's actual assassination happened. Which I'm sure the writer of that episode woke up the next morning and went, "Did Hideaki Anno hit me with the dodgeball that has the gift of prophecy scrawled on it?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is a lot."
Oh no, there wouldn't have been waking up the next morning. That happened at lunchtime. That was a wild day to be in the office.
Indeed.
I can imagine.
I would love to actually hear Sarah unpack a lot of the parallels between Kishinobusuke, the elder Donami, and then the younger Donami, and Abe Shinzo, our recently deceased former prime minister.
Man. You have the shitty fascist and the shitty fascist war criminal grandfather who was also prime minister. So it's like a 1-1 parallel. Like you said, they're not trying to be subtle about it at all.
They're being so unsubtle about it that one of the guys down my local I was talking to about this said, "I can't believe they're not worried they're going to get stabbed or something."
Yeah, no, I'd be worried about that too.
Mm-hmm.
He's got to be getting death threats.
I mean, I do think it's disproportionately easy to get death threats from Japanese Twitter. I remember in 2016, I retweeted some pro-Korea stuff about how Japan needs to pay reparations to comfort women, and my mentions just were trash for 2 days.
The Netoyo, they'll search for English terms too. I've had them flood my mentions.
I don't even have the beginnings of the context to know how to potentially respond to those kinds of things on a cultural level. I mean, every nation, every national community's response to its own capacity for social inequity is different. But there comes a point where, and I guess you kind of noticed that a little bit in the anti-kaijin movement in Black Sun as well, where it's this is kind of a lot to just kind of happen in the open in the world, that, for instance, they can physically assault a child and create a barricade on the main road and people just walk past it because that's none of their business.
I mean, I think it is really calling out a very real tendency in Japanese culture to ignore atrocities that don't directly affect you. When we look at the anti-kaijin protests, they very directly reflect the language and imagery used in real-world protests that are anti-Korean. Brandon, do you remember that time when we were recording for Cindered Seal? We were live streaming, and I had the window open because it was hot, and I had to get up, shut the window, and then make a disclaimer on stream because the anti-Korean truck was driving by and part of the noise got caught.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to go on stream and be like, "We believe Koreans are people in this house. Fuck those guys outside."
Yeah, that was a thing that happened.
Hashtag little Japan things.
Your listeners, I'm wondering, are they going to be familiar with Makoto Sakurai?
Probably not. Let's contextualize.
Okay, so Makoto Sakurai is probably the most prolific racist piece of shit in Japan, and he has been for it's been it's been over a decade now, right?
I remember he ran for governor in 2016.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And even before that, with his first organization, Public Security had him marked.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Public Security, specifically following that one. But yeah, that's like you said, you got these characters in Black Sun that are just straight up XPs for certain politicians. But that asshole who gets what he had coming to him, he's directly based on Makoto Sakurai.
For our listeners, Sakurai founded the political group, the Zaitokukai, which is a political group based entirely on hating Korean people who live in Japan. That is their only platform.
Kind of a stretch to call them a political organization at that point, but I hadn't actually been familiar with Sakurai's name, but I am familiar with the Zaitokukai because there is literally a portion of a YouTube video about racism against Korean citizens in Japan that features the Zaitokukai protesting outside a school because they think a Zainichi child is studying at that school. I can't even remember if it was like an elementary school or a high school, but like there's a certain kind of scumminess attached to that, and it literally happens in Black Sun as well. That are who I really consider the protagonist of the series, our real perspective character. Aoi has just gone back to school after delivering a speech at the UN about Kaijin rights, and immediately afterward, the anti-Kaijin movement is posted up outside her school, literally threatening children, shoving high schoolers, and I'm like, this is a lot. If this were a Western television series, this would be considered heavy handed, but this is an experience that has happened. This is a thing, this is a replication of a real.
Yeah, and I mean, growing up in the rural South here in America, like, yeah, no, you'd have those types of people come to school. I like at least one occasion I vividly remember we had like really gross ultra right wing, like, you're going to hell, all of you are going to hell, like, protesters, and they were allowed to come onto campus and say their piece. So like it's yeah.
Allowed as in on the property?
Yeah.
Okay. There is a level of extremism that I like is not in my like personal vocabulary. It is the thing that I witness online. To be perfectly fair, I feel like very removed from that experience. Even though obviously those kinds of prejudices exist everywhere, often you don't see expressions of it in this way. And I think the thing that I value, especially in the context of Black Sun, is the capacity to witness that and the capacity to witness various facets of the like entire political continuum. From these are all of the obviously fascist opportunists in your community who are just latching on to more opportunities to like make money at the expense of people that they never cared about, and here are complicated leftist movements who you find it very difficult to simultaneously dislike because their goal is good but fully commit to because of the conflicts that they're internally engaging with, and how it has allowed them to slide all the way back down the continuum several levels and affect their ability to be as useful as possible. Like, the thing that kind of sticks with me in this show is we're introduced to what is essentially a young people's movement of Kaijin liberation in Japan that has very noble goals in the beginning and is mostly expressed like very healthily in the show. Like, the show doesn't want us to assume that their intentions are improper, even though violence is one of the goals that they admit is in their arsenal of political action. And then several compromises and incrementalisms lead them to literally being the villains of the series in ways that, again, I'm sure is deliberately touching on a Japanese political experience, but is also like just the political experience that sometimes you just kind of throw your ideals away for the scraps that the majority will give you, and that can make you blind to the effects of those decisions on the communities that are being affected.
Leftist infighting is universal.
Mm-hmm.
But like in the context of like Black Sun in Japanese history, it's God, the leftist infighting was really, really bad.
It's very much based in the Zen Kyoto and the Zen Gakuren, right?
Previously, before that, like the U.S. Japan Security Treaty protests, like in the 60s, and then in like 1970. Yeah, and that generation, and then everybody just blamed each other for like the security treaty like getting passed anyway and like failing or whatever. So all the sects started to split up. But then when you had your like your joint struggle sessions or whatever, like they were still fighting each other then. Like they were still like fracturing and like splitting off and stuff. Like even in just like the same universities during like the Todai riots and stuff like that. So, and that's specifically like when you have those flashbacks like to the 70s, like their little Zen Kyoto group. I think it even says like, I think it's like episode 2 during one of the first flashbacks where like you're in the base or whatever, and I think it says like Zen Kaijin Rights League or something like that, like in English, one of their hand painted signs. Like, yeah, it's not subtle.
I mean, which I appreciate. because again, I think the value of being so overt about those references is it's an opportunity to be politically critical without like saying the actual thing out loud in what I imagine is a circumstance that would be very hostile for all of the people involved if they just said the thing out loud. But also it means for people outside of the know, it's just an opportunity to just engage with the fact that this level of leftist dismissal and infighting is capable of making people the worst versions of themselves. Like the thing that stands out to me about like the fall of the Zen Kaijin movement in the series is around episode 5 or episode 6. Like the episode when we finally see that there are both Kaijins and humans in cages to make heat heaven. Several of the three priests are literally saying they're doing this for all Kaijin, and I'm like, no, you're not. These are your kin in your basement waiting to die. What's happening here? And how do you get to the political point where that is a justification that you can make, like in good faith, that you genuinely think that you are looking out for your best interest, but you're looking out for the best interest of the people who have gained power and not the people who are still disenfranchised?
That actually made me think a lot of queer political action groups where it's just like, yeah, okay, we're going to appeal to respectability politics and throw all the freaks under the bus to try and get some rights for us.
And a lot of conservative POC movements as well, that we must perform respectability in order to gain favor with whiteness, and that means separating ourselves from poverty, even though these are your fellows as well, and you can help them because you have the resources, you just don't want to.
I do think it's really useful that the historical parallels in the 1970s segments of the show are so blatant, because that makes the original Kaijin experiments parallels to Unit 731 probably a little easier for the Japanese audience to accept, because there are a lot of people over here who don't believe that Unit 731 existed, despite the frankly terrifying amount of documentation that exists about it.
Yeah, that's
So this gets back to like the joke that I regularly make about Kamen Rider as a franchise, right? That my favorite scene, the scene that I open with when I describe Kamen Rider as a franchise to other people, is
Starfish Hitler.
no, Takashi Hongo digging up Hitler's buried treasure and destroying it and going, isn't it kind of rad to have a franchise that even very vaguely, very like dismissively in its own way, is going fuck fascists, and then in the year 2000 there are fascists who enjoy the franchise and use it to promote their own ideology on the internet. Cool, fun. And I think that being more overt about some of those things here, like being willing to say, hey, war crimes existed, is a kind of bravery to attach to the franchise.
Which is, in contemporary Japanese society, this is a very bold stance to be taking.
Yeah.
I hate that we are here.
the very beginning of the series. Okay, the series literally starts, like, if I'm not mistaken, the series literally starts with, like, you're watching the experiment, like, the transformation, like, they're operating on the two children to turn them into Black Sun and Shadow Moon. They're inserting, like, the Kingstones or whatever.
Yes.
And it's pretty graphic, you know?
Extremely graphic. It was like, oh, yes, okay, full vivisection experiment, here we go.
Yes. So when I first started watching this and I saw that, my immediate first thought was Unit 731, The Men Behind the Sun, which, like, anybody listening, don't go looking that up or watching it. It's a Hong Kong exploitation film. It's really gnarly. It has, like, real autopsy footage, and it's a very gross dramatization of war crimes committed by Unit 731. But yeah, no, it's visually very similar, and so I'm watching this and I'm thinking, this is not Kamen Rider Black. This is, like, The Men Behind the Sun. And then I kept watching and I'm like, oh, okay, no, yeah, it actually is fucking The Men Behind the Sun. So you have that visual, like, they're kind of borrowing from it. Maybe it's like a visual motif. But yeah, as soon as you start watching, like, right from the get-go, it hits you with that. And if you're familiar with Japanese war crimes, or if you've, like, been unfortunate enough to have sat through any of the Men Behind the Sun movies, like, you know what you're looking at. So I don't know how many people, like, would pick up on that.
When I was talking to some of my friends here, a lot of them, were very shocked shocked by the graphicness, and I was like, that's a reference to an actual thing, and they're like, what? And oh no, we have to have the war crimes talk, and now our friendship is never going to be the same. It's bummers o'clock.
So what I was going to say is like back when The Men Behind the Sun like first came out and then Japan found out about the movie, like there were death threats, and this was way before Twitter. So it's
When you had to pay postage for a death threat. The days of real commitment.
like the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of gets to a framing thing that stands out to me very strongly about Black Sun. Black Sun is not taking any risks about its presentation of any of this context. And in a way, I actually genuinely appreciate that. But as you mentioned that very opening scene, it reminded me of a tension that I had watching the series about how, like, confidently it frames some of the atrocities that take place in the series, knowing that they are references to real events and in a lot of ways deliberately calling back to those events. And speaking specifically as someone whose understanding is primarily of Western racial segregation, I'm thinking specifically of the scene that immediately follows that scene in episode 1, the Kaijin protesters and the Kaijin protesters clashing, which immediately follows into a confrontation that provokes a Kaijin who gets in an altercation with a police officer and is shot. I have a lot of feelings about that. When I saw the trailer the very first time, I was very openly livid on the internet about the fact that I felt like even if that was like one of the touchstones that we're going for, it feels maybe we shouldn't have to put it on screen in this particular way. And it felt like you're only seeing someone actually get shot because it's Amazon Prime and they have money for blood. I have since warmed on the idea that they're taking these risks for a reason, that being overt about those things, much like they were in the very first scene, is the goal. Like, you're supposed to be upset, but it didn't change me being upset. And that kind of continues throughout the series. There is a moment when a young man is literally lynched, his body is literally hung over his family home, which I have a lot of feelings about because that's very visually calling back to the death of Emmett Till. There is a scene in the final episode that is a callback not only to the arrest of a Kurdish man in Japan at the height of the BLM movement, but is also itself calling back to the death of George Floyd. And I feel like while it is important to kind of touch on those things, a part of me is kind of curious why it had to touch them like so directly on the nerve, and whether there was some level of restraint that would also have been valuable, if that makes sense.
I mean, I'm white as hell, and I live in, like, the southern United States. So I don't feel like I'm really in a position to say, like, no, it's good that it was viscerally depicted, like, 1-1 like this. I want to argue, like, artistic merit. They're trying to make a statement. Maybe there are some cultural differences. They're trying to really, like, hit the viewer with the realities of what they're trying to depict. But also at the same time, like, they are depicting, like, a reenactment of, like, actual, like, brutality, oppression, and fucking murder. I can't tell anyone how to feel, but I know for a fact, like, I respect anybody's feelings. There are a lot of people who do think, like, those depictions took it a step too far. And especially, like, we are discussing, like, a genre show. We're discussing, like, a sci-fi karate bugman henshin toy commercial show. But it's just, like, with a bigger budget on Amazon Prime, and it's rated R now. So I was like, is this the medium? Is this as exploitative as something as, like, Unit 731 Men Behind the Sun? I don't think it's that bad, but I also understand that, like, a lot of people are reasonably upset because, like, they're the ones at the end of the gun. Like, they're the ones at risk, man.
Something I'm struggling with as I consider this is, who is this show for, right? I mean, Kamen Rider is always made with primarily a Japanese audience in mind, but the presence or the availability of official English subtitles via Amazon Prime implies to me that they at least considered the possibility of a foreign audience consuming this. And the thing is, the vast majority of people I know here in Japan have heard a little bit about BLM, but haven't seen videos, are not really familiar with the context around it, would not actually recognize these clips as being reenactments of actual hate crimes. So there are some ways I think the references are lost on the primary audience of this show, especially because, oh god, Sarah, did you see the NHK explainer about BLM?
The what?
The really racist one that was animated.
The little cartoon, yes.
And the really
cartoon,
gross,
yes.
like, manner of speaking that they gave they're, well, Yeah.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that one.
Yeah.
That cartoon is actually the context that a lot of the people I'm acquainted with here
Man.
have
Oh.
for BLM. I do think that in a lot of ways this show is attempting to shock the Japanese audience out of their complacency around racial discrimination. And I can understand from a creative perspective why the team might have made the choice to be like, we think that being very graphic with this and deliberately aiming for shock value is what will get people's attention. But I keep coming back to the official English subtitles and wondering, did you think about how this might affect your foreign audience? Or did you think, hey, this might be re traumatizing to show to people who have been actually affected by these crimes? Ah, fuck it, we'll roll with it anyway.
So I mean, the patience that I'm trying to exhibit while watching it, and which is why I'm glad that I didn't let the trailer like dissuade me from watching it. Which I mean, it couldn't. It's Kamen Rider. I'm contractually obligated to do the thing. But the patience that I want to afford the show is whether that was overtly the goal. And I think the thing that I want to hold on to having finished it is first whether there is an engagement that I have as a black person that affects my ability to witness those things as objective art, if there is such a thing. But also whether the intent of the work was just to be graphic about all of these things because these things are graphic. Because again, the opening scene is literally a live surgery on an unanesthetized children so they could put rocks in their spleen. That is a gross oversimplification of what the Kingstones do, but still. The real question is, do we believe that if you shared Black Sun with someone who had no context of any of these things, has never seen BLM in the news, knows nothing about the Ampo protests, will this not only be instructive but moving for them? And I think that it gets to the point where it would be, but the real thing that is valuable there is not the violence, it's one character in particular for the most part, and I reckon a second character, and that's Aoi and the whale kaijin, or for whatever reason, the characters that I attach to the most in this entire series. If only because, in part, the whale kaijin being an ally to the heroes is literally a callback to the original series. Aoi is the kind of ally everyone wishes their allies would be, to the point where sometimes I just kind of want to ask Aoi to chill. Someone tried to kill you. You are allowed to take a breath. You are allowed to decide to relax right now. I feel really renewed in general by the fact that this story is also the story of a teenage girl going, there is injustice in the world, and I can see it because there are people that I care about who aren't family members or love interests or anything like that. These are my friends, these are my neighbors. I care about them because they also deserve to have opportunities that I am presently taking for granted, and I am going to continue to side with them even when my life is at stake, while like paralleling that with the kinds of political extremisms that take place in real society and still having her hold strong to those ideals as a result.
She's very naive, and like a large part of this story is she's 14, like, and yeah, she's in a position of privilege. None of her family members are kaijin. She's not kaijin.
Yet.
But like, she cares very much about this, and she's trying to organize, like, in the modern day. You have your anti-racist protesters, which, I mean, like, shot for shot, they look just like the actual anti-racist protest movements in Japan. The signs, they look just like like Kawasaki against racism, like when they're out there rallying for, actual hate speech laws, things like that. But like, this is a story of a naive girl who she flings herself into trying to speak out against racism and political extremism. And I could tell you, just like from experience, if you just run into that, like, naive thinking that, like, if you just care enough, or if you say the right things, or if you expose the right things to the right people, or if you just, like, stick to itiveness, you can change society and make it better. Or you can reach someone and save them. And the world does not work that way. The world will absolutely break you. And this child learns that the hard way.
I was actually very impressed by that, because when she has her briefcase of evidence and she's like, I'm taking this to the UN, I had to put the thing on pause and put my face in my hands, because I'm like, no, please don't do that. If I expose it, it will all be better plot. because I am old and tired, and here I am. I'm like, no, exposing it doesn't make it better, because the problem is actually that people sort of knew it was going on and they didn't care. And so even though like the ending of this show is kind of a bummer, at least we followed through on this plot point where, like, yes, we have shown the world that the kaijin were manufactured by the government as weapons of war. We have provided ample photographic evidence of full-on and crimes against humanity, and it has not fixed the situation.
How do I put this? The thing that I think ultimately I appreciate about Aoi isn't like, you are correct in acknowledging that naivete, and a part of me values it. It's giving Greta Thunberg, and I have a lot of respect for Greta Thunberg, but at the end of the day, there are people whose livelihoods are built upon destroying the earth, and they will never be moved. And that's why I also like that at the end, Aoi is like more radically motivated in a way that is really rad, and I love it a lot. And I still appreciate that the show doesn't go that violence is inappropriate in all circumstances, because we live in a violent world. But I think the thing that I value about Aoi in particular, which I guess is a byproduct of that naivete, is even when she is put in a position to be of the same distrust that other people who hate kaijin have, never crosses her mind in the first place. Like, there is a point where she is literally turned into a kaijin and admits that she is full of hatred for the people who did that to her. And it's at that moment that she actually becomes a great deal less forgiving in general and more prone to giving in to her anger, which is also accurate. But I still appreciate that even in the realm of all of that spite and judgment, she's still willing to be compassionate to her enemies, even when her enemies have only spoken to her twice since then and haven't apologized. She's still willing to say, you know what, I could kill you. I'm just letting you know I could kill you anytime I want, but you're gonna give me a ride to this place right now.
I very much enjoyed her dynamic with Eugenia in the last couple episodes.
Especially since I had watched Amazons. I'm not finished with Amazons, but I finished season 1 of Amazons. And there's a similar dynamic, a similar character dynamic of a young female audience surrogate character who, even in the face of violence, is very unnecessarily kind to everyone. And I appreciate that I appreciate that there is a nugget of compassion that Aoi holds on to.
I don't think it's entirely compassion. I do think that some part of her liked making him uncomfortable. Maybe I'm projecting, because certainly if I was in that position, yes, I will definitely make the person who killed my parent deeply, deeply uncomfortable. And I'm going to enjoy every second of that.
Yeah, fair.
But the entire point of the show was, Aoi is a better person than me. Aoi is a better person than all of us. And honestly, even in the end, when she is shown running her training camp for radical leftists, like teaching children to build Molotov cocktails.
No, those are straight up pipe bombs.
Yeah, there was powder. Yeah, I remember powder.
No, those were straight up pipe bombs.
But yes, even at the end where she is running this training camp where small children are building pipe bombs, I still felt like she's still a more morally correct person than I am.
Like, she knows how to make weapons. She knows at least 6 children who can slit an adult's throat. But she still saw this thing happening, saw this child being absolutely bullied in the street, and didn't hurt anybody immediately. Just took that child by the hand and go, hey, do you want to learn how to build a pipe bomb? I dig that a lot. And ultimately, like, the thing...
I am not advocating for the pipe bomb as a tool of political discourse necessarily.
Did it work in the 70s? Like, none of those, like, the bombing campaigns of the 70s, especially here in the United States, like, they didn't change anything. And the members of the Weather Underground, I think they only succeeded in taking out, like, 2 of their own in, like, an accident in a swank, super expensive fucking, like, Greenwich Village fucking townhouse, literally right next door to Dustin Hoffman. So, I don't, like... Community defense is great. Community defense is necessary. I used to be just a staunch pacifist. You know, like, I'll stand in front of you and take a bullet, like, so the Nazis don't get you, but I'm gonna cry at them and I'm gonna try to get them out and, like, save people and blah, 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 blah. Okay, but, like, community defense is necessary. Teaching a bunch of children how to make pipe bombs might not be.
I think there's definitely a setup where Aoi is starting down the path for her group to also Gorgamize itself, right?
Yeah.
With another cycle of violence
Yes.
and incremental compromise,
Yes.
leading to absorption by the wider political mess.
History of leftist struggle is obviously very fraught, to be sure. But, like, I think in a lot of ways it is uniquely valuable to know that things happened, if that makes sense. It's very easy to assume, oh, because there are no successes in this conflict, that discussion about the work itself is invaluable because those are discussions of failures. But those projects are still opportunities to learn what works and what doesn't work. And like the Zen Kaijin struggle in Black Sun stands out because at least you know now that there is a likelihood of this kind of unique conflagration of circumstances that will dilute your goals, and you can be better equipped to have more meaningful discussion about how to avoid being essentially taken over by fascism and capitalism because you know what your own weaknesses are.
Or literally destroying yourselves.
Yeah. I struggle to find words to qualify that, especially when it comes to media, and especially in a franchise like Kamen Rider, that, as previously noted, is just what if Grasshopper Bugman, Kick Hard, Explode, has the capacity to, like, potentially reframe not just the history of a political experience, but viewers' own internal understanding of what it means to be, like, physically political is actually, like, genuinely impressive in a sense. Beyond the learning of the thing, it's kind of interesting to see whether this will like have some kind of mild fandom ripple effect where folks will perhaps leave that viewing experience going, I have discovered something more radical about the ways in which I can engage politically in my space. That probably will not rise to the level of violence that is here because this is violence at scale, but will perhaps ask people to be more physically engaging in elements of segregation and class struggle that often we are asked to not consider our business because it gets in the way of us continuing to live our own lives.
It would be nice to have that kind of hope.
Kamen Rider has. I want to believe that Kamen Rider has the capacity to do the thing. I want to believe this series in particular, while, I mean, it's just 10 episodes of Amazon Prime content. But like, I want to believe that simply exposing people to these historical facts has the capacity to make, especially young people, go, oh, I knew some part of these things, but I was never asked how I felt about these things until now, and I will probably feel a thing about it. Perhaps the only thing that clouds that is the actual portrayal of Kaijin in the show itself, which is also very complicated because it is kind of a clouded metaphor in a lot of ways. The other as monster is a clouded metaphor in science fiction media writ large. But Kaijin in Black Sun serve a lot of different marginalizations in ways that do not overlap and can often be very complicated to kind of assess. I'm thinking specifically of Nick, who I should have a lot of very good feelings about, but actually struggled to enjoy as a character because of his relationship to Kaijin identity. Because the show kind of colors it very obviously as racial, ethnic, and LGBTQ discrimination in very distinct and obvious ways. But when those things don't mesh, the observation of a certain kind of struggle therein is very imperfect, if that makes sense.
I think if I have one hope for any ripple effect this show has, it's just, can we maybe just reduce war crimes denialism among the general population? I'd really like that. I actually think that that's not likely, and if anything, seeing it fictionalized this way is going to continue to lead people to be like, oh no, it didn't happen. They made that up for TV. But like, oh boy.
So I think you've touched on something that's also worth acknowledging, and I guess I'll pose that question to Sarah as well. Do you think that it's better for it to be speculative about these kinds of historical facts than just documentary quality about it, if that makes sense? Do you think that using Kamen Rider as a frame is perhaps helpful in creating distance, or do you believe that they would have probably benefited from even less distance and just confronting the thing head on even more so?
I mean, we're talking about Kamen Rider, and in the context of like a Japanese audience, it's some fucking otaku shit, right? Okay, I don't know if you've noticed, but I mean, especially in Japan, but here in America too. But otaku, especially the terminally online type, who are like raised on 2 channel, they aren't the most like tolerant or kind or not racist people you'll ever encounter. So I think there's an argument that I could see being made that, like, trying to tackle something like this in a Kamen Rider show, in a tokusatsu show, in a fucking otaku pandering fucking show, like, maybe that's not entirely appropriate. But you're also putting these things in otaku spaces. That's a good thing, I think. Like, fucking, you're taking, like, I love otaku shit. I love being an obsessive. I love being a nerd. I love being a stupid cringe weeb, okay? But, like, there's a lot of hate.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, like, tackling it through something like just like an otaku medium, fuck yeah. It's long overdue. Fucking go for it.
I'm inclined to agree.
Fucking challenge them on their
Yeah.
home turf.
Like,
Yeah?
in a lot of ways, like, I think especially young otaku have or we can trust them with the capacity to potentially discover, hey, there is a perspective that I learned about the world that was guided by my own biases or my own fears about the world. And now there is this thing asking me, hey, maybe that's not complete. Maybe there are more things that I need to learn. And I think even though, again, the kaijin metaphor is very muddy, I think that's enough of an opening point for some folks, some 20 something somewhere, to go, these people are suffering. That's not cool. Maybe I'm causing that suffering. And hopefully that becomes something else for that person as well. I want to be hopeful that that is the goal, because that's clearly the intent. I want them to actually get there.
I feel very lucky that the kind of otaku places I hang out in real life are significantly more welcoming than online spaces tend to be. But even so, there are times where I am really hesitant to disclose that, like, my hafu isn't white hafu, it's Chinese. So instead of explaining that I'm Japanese Chinese mixed, I will just, roll with it. Yes, I'm definitely like half French or something. Sure, we'll go with that. So, like, living with that kind of racism here definitely makes me feel a little cynical about what media can actually do to change it. But I think that if media is going to change it, it probably does need to go as hard as Black Sun did, if not harder, because so much of the rhetoric is word for word how right wingers in Japan talk about Korean and Chinese people. Like, when Shunsuke calls the mob screaming at him racists, and they say, we're not racists. Racism is for humans. That is literally an argument that I have seen happen about Korean people. And I honestly think if they had gone any lighter, people would have ignored the metaphor.
A part of me is also kind of worried sometimes with this metaphor in particular that some people will also go, see, they're saying that marginalized people are literally monsters as well. So of course we're not supposed to trust them. But I feel like there is enough nuance. Again, like, to be overt about the issue that I had with Nick is I am okay with a muddy othering metaphor because there is room then for every individual's experience to be different. Like, that's the thing that I want to get about Nick, that even though he knows that this is a state of marginalization, he wants to strongly identify with being a kaijin, even though he isn't, and then becomes a kaijin and is genuinely euphoric about it. Feels like that's supposed to be like a strong transition touchstone, but that it's happening alongside very obvious racial touchstones, and that Nick only enters the conversation about being a kaijin after potentially risking Aoi's life in the process. All feel like they're rubbing against each other for the position of valuable metaphor in a way that kind of, like, briefly takes me out of that engagement. And I felt like if they stuck with the thing, would have been like the Heat Heaven stuff, which I wasn't aware of the historical context of at the time, are some of the strongest discussions about.
Oh, yes, we got to see your thread about that, Sarah, but if you would like to unpack that a little for our listeners.
Oh yeah, okay. So okay, so are we going with, like, Japanese methamphetamine epidemic in the post-war, and then the subsequent, like, blanket ban on methamphetamine after the war? Or are we going with the the HIV contaminated blood products.
Can we do both?
Courtesy of...
Because I think we also have to talk about the meth
Okay.
epidemic to frame how weird and a little shocking it is that our introduction to our new Kamen Rider is him shooting up with ketamine.
Yeah. Oh man, I've finally some representation for people like me. Anyway. Okay, so the heaven and the heat heaven stuff, you might think it's a little sci-fi and heavy-handed, especially because if you don't have like a deep dive sort of historical context, if you can't reference like, previous historical events, you might just be like, okay, well, what are their motivations? I don't understand what not Shinzo Abe's motivations are here. Okay, so you're telling me that the cult, like, hooked up with the political party, but then like the modern day prime minister took all the Unit 731 shit and then just decided to fucking like sell it off and like knowingly infect people and like use people parts and like keep that cycle flowing just to make money. So like this shitty corrupt politician, like his major flaw is that he's greedy. Okay, well that's not realistic. Like that's too on the nose, right? Like this is obviously a work of fiction. Like if you were to hand this draft into me, I'd be like, come on man, you gotta put more effort into it than this. But former commanders from Unit 731 established Japan's first blood bank, and it was an entirely for-profit venture immediately after the war, because you know what? People need blood. Who would have fucking guessed? In a post-war society, when everything's really fucked up and they're trying to rebuild, you need medical supplies. You're gonna need blood supplies. You're gonna need blood transfusions. So a bunch of literal fucking war criminals were allowed to establish a fucking for-profit blood bank. It became a pharmaceutical corporate juggernaut that eventually became known as the Green Cross Corporation. So once the main fucking war criminal that was running the show died in the early 80s, like corporate control was effectively transferred to a bunch of assholes associated with the Ministry of Health and Welfare. So you had a bunch of fucking Ministry of Health and Welfare, like pharmaceutical fucking bureaucrats, running this effective corporate monopoly on blood products, like real blood products, and also like... So anyway, the AIDS crisis happens. And it turns out, the blood supply, you get blood from people in the middle of an epidemic of like a fucking like fatal disease that is transferred, like blood. You need to screen that shit. You need to heat that shit. Multiple countries, US being one, discovered that like, okay, you have to superheat this shit. You have to kill the virus. No blood supply can be assumed to be just like completely free of HIV/AIDS, especially right now. Okay, but the Green Cross Corporation, and they're friends with the LDP and the other fucking war criminal that hadn't kicked off yet, I guess. They were like, nah, fuck that. We don't need to heat shit. So they proceeded to fucking flood the market with tainted blood supplies. You know who needs blood supplies like blood plasma? Hemophiliacs. Japan allowed one company to infect roughly half of the entire population of hemophiliacs with HIV. And they let this go on for years because they just wanted to make money. And you would think like, well, why, didn't other people like just import, screened, treated, clean, safe blood supplies from other countries? Because it would cut into the Green Cross's fucking profits. So a bunch of people raised hell about how like, this isn't fair. Free market or something. I don't fucking know. They fucking infected like over like 1,000 people with HIV, and they made a fuck ton of money off of it, and they almost got away with it. But see, letting the hemophiliacs get sick was the problem. See, the gay community and the intravenous drug users, fuck them, right? Like, AIDS is a bad person's disease. Like, we're not even going to acknowledge them. We're not even going to acknowledge AIDS. AIDS is an America problem. It's another people problem. It's not really a Japan problem. And the few cases we may have here that we're not going to really discuss in polite society, it's fucking gay people and drug users. And that's also a foreign thing. That ain't us, right? But the hemophiliacs, okay, like, they hadn't done anything wrong. Like, in the context of, like, conservative Japanese society, like, they were pure. They were innocent. And all of a sudden, there were thousands of them, including children who had done nothing wrong. And they were like, hey, I have fucking AIDS. You let me get AIDS. I'm not even out of high school yet. And all of a sudden it became okay to talk about AIDS. And then people could get upset. And eventually, like, the Green Cross Corporation, like, had to fold. And I think, like, 3 people were fucking charged with manslaughter, because they knowingly distributed tainted blood supplies in the middle of a fucking pandemic. And, like, upwards of 500 people died. And that's the story of the Green Cross. So, Unit 731.
A little context for our listeners. Most of the war criminals from World War II just got away with it.
Oh, yeah.
Like some Operation Paperclip in overdrive shit happened over here. So it's not just that the Japanese government let them off the hook. The USA government helped.
We facilitated it.
As harrowing as it is, observations like that are the moments when the kaijin metaphor is strongest. Because, like, there are points when observing the fact that this marginalization is manufactured feels like it's missing the mark of trying to observe these things. Like, are you saying that race is manufactured? I mean, it is, but you can't literally make me black. And then, when we get to learning about Heat Heaven, this is the point where the show is literally saying, they're taking people who have already been marginalized and going, hey, would you rather be more marginalized or just die? And that's fucking a lot. Especially in a show where no one has to deal with race until mid-episode 10 to still be able to admit, no, there are people who are suffering because they are poor or because they're queer. And the government literally gave them a choice of how they wanted to die. And knowing that is based in a reference to
actual comments that the LDP has made. Actual goddamn comments from politicians who are part of the current ruling party of this country.
Man, they have, like, knockoff Shinzo Abe, but they also have him, like, palling around with knockoff Taro Aso. Like, they straight up recreate, like, some pictures. Like, they were always, like, laughing and fucking around. Like, Taro Aso, that dude thought Hitler was really cool. So, this is what we're dealing with.
They come very close to directly quoting Sugita Mio about how LGBT people are not productive members of society.
Cool.
No.
Delightful.
When I watched this, I was like, I am so glad that this is out right now. But at the same time, I cannot believe that nobody looked at this and went, maybe we should postpone it until next year. We delayed the last episode of Madoka because we thought it might be triggering for people because of a natural disaster. Does anyone remember when that happened?
Yeah, I remember because I was watching it live, but, like, I feel like that's a bit different. Like, what, upwards of, like, 20,000 people died? And between 150,000, 200 people, like, fucking displaced, and the entire country was like...
And one fascist getting iced.
Yeah, it's like, one thing was actually, like, a catastrophe that hurt a lot of people. The other thing was...
one thing was much worse.
Yeah.
The other thing actually seems to be, having a tangible effect on politics.
Maybe.
I am hoping that if the Unification Church can sort of be pulled back, maybe we can also reduce the influence of Scientology and so forth. Oh my god, they're so aggressive here.
Yeah, they opened that center in Tokyo, like 4 or 5 years ago?
Fully 30% of the advertisements that come through my mailbox are for Scientology. These people really want me to do Dianetics.
Yes, they do.
I also want most of the stuff that I know about religious political activity are Unification Church and Happy Science. It is the official perspective of Righteous Kicks the podcast that people shouldn't have to die to achieve these kinds of political ends. But I kind of really hope that the end goal isn't your political future being run by someone's church, because that's kind of scummy.
The real Okawa's hurt, like, so many people, like, people that I know personally. Like, fuck Happy Science.
I don't even know where to begin on Happy Science. Everything that I've learned about Happy Science is from the internet, so I'm perfectly fine to call myself an idiot, but the things that I've learned are, like, disturbing. So yeah, I would like to not have my friends live in a future where a church can make their political decisions. Religion and politics are already, like, fraught in general, but I think one of the things, like, very kind of secondarily in the show itself that is paired with religious thought and politics is the idea that at some point it becomes remarkably obvious that none of this engagement is obviously spiritual in the first place. and people who are genuinely looking for some manner of peace in their lives will trade that for money and still believe that they're doing the right moral thing. I mean, the very fact that they call themselves priests and gather in an office that is so ornate in the first place, and yet will gather in that office to discuss the brutal murder of children, was actually kind of significant to me. That at least twice in that space they're like, we need to kill Aoi. Who's gonna kill Aoi? While surrounded by obviously religious iconography and literally wearing robes.
You know, it was very weird to me that in the Gorgon boardroom, they have a Kamidana. No one's ever shown using it, but it's very conspicuously present in the back of a lot of the shots.
Mm-hmm.
It was also very interesting to me that in the flashback where little Kotaro and Nobuhiko go find the Creation King is actually enshrined as a Goshintai in a jinja somewhere. And there's even, you know, a little Nusa and offerings laid out before him. So he's clearly being venerated as a kami.
Yeah, by itself, jeez.
I do think that to some extent this is meant to speak to Shinto as tool of imperialism, because even in the modern world, it is conservatively aligned to the point that when people find out I'm religious, I then have to spend some time explaining that I'm not right-wing.
I mean, aside from the obvious cult parallels and the human trafficking and the kaijin trafficking, I don't know if you noticed, but when Nick was a child, his father was murdered in front of him by the cult.
In Omori Baptist Church.
You remember that?
Which I had a lot of feelings about.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. So anyway, the cult and the bad guy, they roll in when this child is like a literal child, and he has to spit the magic rock out of his mouth because he had to hide the magic rock in his mouth because Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was coming over to kill his dad. And so the cult killed his dad. And then his life kind of got fucked up when he was a child because of the cult that was intertwined with the not LDP. And he grew up to want power more than anything else. He got that power, and he went and he killed Shinzo Abe. Kind of crazy. Yeah, it really do be like that sometimes. Yeah, sometimes kids raised in the church who lose their families to the LDP human trafficking cult shit grow up to murk Shinzo Abe.
As you do.
With a bat kaijin who looks a lot like Yoshifu Arita. Shit happens.
You know, I hadn't even drawn all of the connections to that specific moment until you just said that aloud. The fact that he died in the church and all of that, like, kind of glossed over me, and I was just like, yay, we peeled this guy's head off. And now I'm like, oh, right, it's literally the thing. A religious organization robbed you of your family, and you have sought violent power with the deliberate intention of committing violence, and that was your only intention.
Look, man, if Shinzo Abe came into my house when I was a kid and made me, like, spit out the magic rock I was hiding in my mouth, like I was like a fucking, like a dog, and there's like, spit it out. No, spit it out. And like Shinzo always like holding his hands out, just like, meh, spit it out. And I have to spit out the magic rock, and then I look over, and my dad has been beaten to death. It's like, I would probably want to become a kaijin, and yeah, I'd probably want to get swole and rider kick Shinzo Abe's head off. Can I say that? I don't think I can say that.
Yes, you can. Here, you can say
okay,
that.
well,
Also, I'm sorry, can we just shout out how terrible and like perfect, but terrible the Foley work is when the Prime Minister is eating his curry-katsu? That was honestly like equally repulsive to me as that first episode fatality where the Kamen Rider straight up rips off the Spider Kaijin's head. Honestly, no, I think it was a little worse. The mouth sounds were worse.
The part that stood out to me in that exact same episode, is that the exact same episode where this other guy is picking his teeth with chopsticks? I'm like, is that a thing that people do? Cool.
No, that's much later.
Cool. Fun.
So, before we go, I actually do want to talk about the portrayal of drugs in this show. That was very interesting to me because Japan is like very, very, very anti-drug. Like, Japan thinks reefer madness is a real thing that happens. So, to have the Kamen Rider introduced to us Nonetheless, with a ketamine dependency, that come to think of it, we never see him with any withdrawal symptoms later, do we? I feel like even though we're not shown him doing ketamine after the first episode, we don't see him suffer any negative effects from just apparently going cold turkey, which is a little odd because he was shown buying kind of a large quantity of it. Sarah, would you like to contextualize the meth epidemic a little and why Japan is so aggressively anti-drug?
Oh, maybe you should tackle that one.
Okay. Despite the way that during World War II, the government fed soldiers loads and loads and loads of meth, truly horrifying amounts of drugs to get them to go out and do the things they were doing. Not that they needed much help with it, but it made them less scared of dying in the process. Like, let's get this straight, the war crimes would have happened without the meth, but I think there would have probably been a lot less willingness to die for glorious country without the meth.
I mean, Hitler did the same thing, like the Blitzkrieg and yeah.
And then also in the 70s and 80s, a lot of people figured out how to make meth from cough syrup. This is why NyQuil is still illegal in Japan, just so you know. In post-war Japan, there was an extreme swing towards conservatism, especially as hippie movements in America and England got more druggy. There became this just divergence of, we're not like that, we're good. And this means that, like, marijuana, super duper illegal in Japan, and also actively lied about to children. Like, the things that pot can do to your body and brain are significantly exaggerated in most Japanese language media. Pot is not really very likely to make you murder anyone. That's not what anti-drug propaganda in Japan wants you to think.
I mean, they used reefer madness as a fucking legal defense during the Sagamihara trial. The Sagamihara massacre at Yamayuri, and they literally said it's because he had done some weed, because he wrote a letter offering to systematically exterminate all disabled people who were incapable of even saying or knowing their own name, and he tried to hand deliver it to the prime minister, and they were like, "Oh, you should probably go see a specialist." So he went inpatient for a minute, and they made him do a piss test, and he popped positive for marijuana, and they were like, "Oh, that's your problem. You smoked weed a few days ago. Okay, you can go now." They should not have let him go.
So, because of this extremely anti-drug culture, it was very surprising to me that we see the Kamen Rider doing ketamine. It was even more surprising to me that they then made this the gimmick on which Kamen Rider, Black Sun's signature cocktail at Kamen Rider the Diner is based on.
Yeah, that's kind of what he described.
And so it was definitely little awkward last night that there were children in the room while I was injecting a syringe of mysterious red liquid into what was basically like a very weak vodka sunrise.
Why is that happening So Kamen Rider is just a toy advertisement, right? It's supposed to be bright and cheery. I'm sure in Kamen Rider the Diner, other signature dishes for other riders are just, here's a hamburger cut in a weird shape. Here's a virgin cocktail for the children to drink. Here's drugs. The only Black Sun things that you can consume in Kamen Rider the Diner are, here's an injection, and here's something the show says has human meat in it.
That's not fair. There's an entire limited menu. I had the tantan udon. It was pretty okay. The fried egg was a little overcooked. But, like, there's also mushroom stew. Next month, they're going to do the Prime Minister's curry.
Every one of these cafes, they do it at the fucking Sentai, the Super Sentai Cafe.
Oh, Lord.
Every single menu, they have a damn curry.
This curry is super cost effective.
I mean, it is. It solves a lot of problems.
I want the Shinzo Abe curry special.
Everyone will enjoy it. Very cheap and very quick to make.
Yeah, like, I'm not usually a think of the children person, but the Kamen Rider Diner is an all-ages experience. Especially because there's lots of Sentai stuff in there, too. It's like the combination Kamen Rider and Sentai Diner. So, it's a little weird in such an anti-drug country to decide that we're going to make drugs the joke that this drink is based on.
Like, if your middle schooler asks, what are they having at that table over there? You're not just gonna tell them they're having the ketamine.
It's not called the ketamine on the menu. It is called the drink of sorrowful fate, okay?
That's the fucking coolest thing I've ever heard. I'm sorry, that's the coolest thing I've ever heard in my life.
I mean, it's actually kind of meta,
No, that's
but
great.
like, why?
Why are we questioning why? Just fucking roll with it. You're thinking about it. Don't think about it.
I'm still confident that if Kamen Rider Amazons is on the diner menu, it's really just one hamburger. A very bad hamburger. But they decided let's put drugs here.
I will say Kamen Rider the Diner is better than a lot of other Collabo restaurants because it is a permanent installation and therefore has standards to keep. A temporary pop-up Collabo cafe, the curry may not be fully defrosted before it hits your table. Looking at you, Review Starlight.
Sorry.
Yikes!
But places like the Kirby Cafe and the Kamen Rider the Diner, which are permanent installations, do have to meet a minimum threshold of edibility.
It's just the same curry repackaged over and over, but it tastes better when it's on a Sentai menu.
The same curry ingredients, just with a sign nearby.
I want the ketamine.
And I also consumed Heat Heaven last night. Heat Heaven tastes like blueberries, if anyone was wondering.
I'm much more curious about the texture. It looks very chewy in the show.
Have you ever had an aloe drink?
I have.
It's that. It's an aloe drink.
Okay, cool. It looks initially like pure jello, but still. Because those are like fucking solid.
It's a little less gelatinous than it is in the show. I'm very confused by the merch decisions that have been made around Black
They
Sun.
could have just made people eat food. But yes.
No, the food is weird because the food is like an all ages experience for what is very much not an all ages show, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the toys are just like, yes, we will spend 50,000 yen on an automatic belt that can detect when you pose.
The belt is kind of cool, though. I mean, it's kind of impressive. I too just want to make a fist and know that the thing is doing the thing. I just want to do it for a Forze belt instead.
I do feel like at the end of the day, I am walking away with a fundamental unsureness about who this show was really meant for.
This is my hole. It was made for me. Who is this show made for? And I'm over here like watching the scene where the cops roll up on the fucking bus, and I'm like, oh yeah, I've watched literally hundreds of hours of Om Shinrikyo news coverage. I know what I'm looking at right now, and I'm over here like, yeah, no, this is made for me.
I mean, my thing is, Kamen Rider as a franchise, because it has been so traditionally youth-oriented, I'm trying to figure out how to articulate this. It often feels like the mainstream series are meant to be, this is a kid's show, but you can like it too because we want your money. We want so much of your money. So to me, because I didn't watch Amazon's probably, this is the first time I've consumed a Kamen Rider that is actually oriented at adults. And I like it. Overall, I feel pretty positively about Black Sun. I think it's really beautiful what they've done with the budget. Holy shit, the effects. The kaijin faces are gorgeous. Like, I truly, truly love especially Shunsuke's kaijin form. Those feathers are gorgeous. The attention to detail and having fights places that aren't quarries is great. But I wonder about whether or not it's viable to keep making adult-oriented Kamen Riders. My complaint is that this needs to hit a wider audience in Japan than it actually will.
So, I think to your point, the thing that I am taking away from Black Sun is I want to believe that a lot of nerds will watch this and go, I have discovered something about the world that I did not think about before. That I knew was true, but was none of my business before, and is now my business. There are some things that I wish it did just a little bit better. Most approaches to marginalization using the monster metaphor are very cloudy, but ultimately it cares enough about history that I feel like I got something that helps me think more deeply about what it means to act politically in the world and what kind of compromises are being made around me on a regular basis as a marginalized person, and which of those compromises I am not willing to stand. And I want to believe that if we expose more people to it, and why I'm glad that it's on Amazon Prime as a result, more people get to see it less as this is a cool rider thing that's happening, and more as this drama is very meaningful and also happens to have giant grasshoppers kicking people's heads off. Because that's what we're here for, to see Shinzo Abe's head be severed so cleanly that when it hits the floor, his jaw is no longer surrounded by skin. But Sarah, what are your thoughts? Your final thoughts about Kamen Rider Black Sun?
I think it's better than nothing. Like, no, it's not going to be perfect. But I don't really give a shit because, like, man, some of these terminally online fucking 2-channel otaku are like fucking 4chan Nazis. They're literally just the worst people. And I think that making a Kamen Rider series that's performatively woke as fuck and based on actual history, it pisses them off. It is hilarious to me. And I hope fucking Amazon flushes more money down the toilet and makes more to continue to piss them off. They're racist. Fuck them.
I will ask then, just as a kind of silly aside question, if they could give another Showa era rider the Amazon treatment, what other series would you want them to do?
It's gotta be Showa? V3 or Skyrider. But I just want like a fucking woke, like trippy fucking psychedelic fucking V3 remake. I don't know. Fuck it. We can have a stand-in that's obviously supposed to be like Benjamin Fulford, and then like Western weebs will think it's Alex Jones and they'll get like really pissed off, but like it's obviously like Ben Fulford, and you can have a not Richard Koshimizu type and a not Yamato Q, and fuck it, we can roundhouse kick like their jaws off. I don't even give a shit. Like freaking make it happen.
I dig this, of course. I mean, my personal decision, I would love a Kamen Rider X remake just so we could keep Starfish Hitler verbatim and just have him surrounded by blood. Just like tear limbs off. Yeah, which means that we just keep continuing to cause him pain. This doesn't disappoint me at all.
I think if we're going to woke remake any Showa Rider, I want it to be Kamen Rider Stronger, and we're going to go even harder on, like, infiltrate and destroy a cult from within.
I'm in favor of all of these things. So who do we email at Amazon Prime Japan then?
Ultimately, my position about Black Sun is like, I'm really grateful that this happened. I'm grateful that it happened now. At the same time, I resent that I'm in a place where we have to feel grateful for that, because I just want to point out, like, you two know this, of course, but war crimes denialism is just a very widespread and serious problem in Japan. Denialism of hate crimes against Koreans is a huge problem in Japan. The Kanto Massacre's 100-year anniversary is coming up in September 2023, and the official government-sanctioned death toll for that is something like 250 people, where actual estimates put it at upwards of 6,000 Koreans murdered after the Great Kanto earthquake. Like, there was a 3-week lynching campaign.
They poisoned the wells.
And what does the governor of Tokyo have to say about that? Yuriko says that it's a matter of debate whether it happened. Like, that is the official position of the governor of Tokyo. Honestly, like, with how hard this show came for Abe Shinzo, I'm kind of disappointed they didn't also go for Yuriko.
Yeah, but we did get to see like Sakurai's head get like smeeshed. Violence is bad. I don't condone it. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy.
We don't condone it, but sometimes sci-fi violence can feel very cathartic to watch.
Yeah, especially after he fucking lynched someone. Fuck around and find out.
It is because I know I cannot crush someone's skull that seeing someone's skull crushed gives me joy. My only disappointment is that I wish that we could linger on that exploding skull the way that we lingered on Shinsuke's body, but you can only pop ahead so quickly.
Ultimately, I'm very glad Kamen Rider Black Sun exists in this political moment. And I hope we get more things that approach corruption in Japanese politics and the racism upon which Japanese society runs with active criticism.
I hope like the next woke Kamen Rider show is also named after like some Nazi shit. Because this show is called Kamen Rider Black Sun, for fuck's sake. And it's like, it's the most like staunchly fucking leftist, anti-racist, anti-fascist thing I've fucking seen come out of Japan for a minute. And it's called Black Sun. So it's like, if we could get like Kamen Rider Sun Wheel. That was like saying Kamen Rider Sun Wheel.
Kamen Rider Hitler's Lost Gold.
Kamen Rider Vril. Like,
now I'm actually kind of imagining like a random European skinhead coming across the show and going, maybe there's something revealing about this Japanese series that I should watch, and going, oh, it's revealing to me how my politics are a sham? cool. I guess I need to grow my hair again.
Yeah. Imagine being like a fucking Nazi and you type Black Sun into Amazon because you're looking for like some racist shit, like some esoteric fucking Hitler shit, and like you see, what the hell is this? And you watch it, and like within the first 5 minutes, you're like, oh my god.
You know what? Yes, this is our new goal. Like, Kamen Rider shows that deconvert Nazis.
No, yeah, I love this because it's literally like I'm imagining any of those experiences the way that I imagine that one episode of the original Kamen Rider where they open the sarcophagus full of Hitler's treasure and go, wait, Kamen Rider's in the box. Yeah, this is what I want now. It will give me so much joy.
Before we sign off, I just want to interject and say that, like, in the first episode, Nobuhiko, who he's chained to the wall, he's been in prison, he looks like
Is
Shoko
he supposed
Asahara.
to look like? Yes, I was going to ask that.
I
Yes.
was wondering whether that was purposeful or not.
Yeah, man, that guy looks like Big Baby Sonshi.
At least they didn't put him in the full pajamas.
But, I mean, he couldn't wear the Kurta.
I mean, I think they wanted us to see him, like, being super emaciated.
Well, I mean,
but...
it's also just like walking into the prison and being like, you take all of our tax dollars, why are we supporting you? Why are we feeding you this shit? And it's like, it's a guy chained to the wall, looks like fucking Shoko Asahara.
Again, discourse ripped from the headlines.
Man.
I just want more realness like this all the time. Some of it is a lot, but like I want people to try like this on a regular basis.
Shadow Moon's about to declare himself the Christ.
The Jesus Magneto of the world.
That did indeed happen.
Sarah, it has been a complete delight having you on the show with us today. Where can our audience find you and follow you?
Well, I currently reside in a bus on the outskirts of town, and I am
with 20 dead cops on your lawn.
20 dead cops on my lawn who tried to roll up.
While you were speaking to the UN?
Yeah, while I was trying to tell my followers that it's okay to, face a death without regret. I'm severely addicted to ketamine. And when I finally get ready to set out on my own and like do this activism thing for real, I'm probably going to be flying the flag of a dead terrorist that I crushed on, even though it was highly inappropriate.
As one does.
Because that's what happened at the end of the show. Anyway.
We would like to remind and to our listeners, let's try to live out always ideals. Let's try to just go out there and be decent, and also kick fascists in the face. Maybe not kick their heads clean off. I'm pretty sure that's prosecutable. But be transformed. Stay righteous. Jam the machine of fascism.
Yes. Do what you must to not be arrested, but please throw your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels whenever possible. Until next time, as we say very regularly on this show, and is also very useful advice in general, be transformed and stay righteous.
If you want to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty or skiffyandfanty.com, our website, where you can get access to all of our fancy things. Our music comes from Holy Mole. You can support him and his work at patreon.com/holymole. Thank you for listening.